And then some people, went to prison, had to do time for it. And then some people didn't get that lucky. And, they lost their life during a robbery or something like that. You know what I mean? And then you had a group of guys that were going around in a van and they were acting like they was the Detroit police. And they had blazers, the thin jackets that says police on the back of them. But really, they wasn't police officers. What they were doing is they was going around robbing drug houses because they just felt like that was a quick way, instead of selling drugs, they figured they would just rob the drug dealer and just get all the money at one time. You know what I mean? So, and this happened quite a bit with people. Until one time a guy got shot and his crew left him behind, and then he had the blazer jacket on, the police jacket. So that's when they put all that together, what was going on and stuff. And I don't know if I'm not certain if they caught the other guys. They might have, through the investigation and everything. But them guys were just didn't want to waste time on selling drugs. They just wanted to rob the drug dealer that had all the money and stuff, all at once. So, that's what they were doing. And so that being said, I just give you an idea of what was taking place back in them days, It was just crazy, Then they had restaurants that was selling cases of canned food out the basement of the restaurant. And they would sell this for money or for food stamps, whatever, And certainly that this wasn't a legit business. This is a cafe restaurant selling cases of canned food out of their basement. You know what I mean? And this is a long time ago, but this is what kind of stuff was going on, And then you had the liquor stores. They would trade people cash for food stamps and stuff like that. You had that going on. Just anything that somebody, even if they're running a legit business or whatever, anything that somebody could make a extra buck on, that's what they were doing. Like, just say if you had food stamps and you wanted to trade them to a liquor store, they would probably give you maybe 70 in cash for 100 in food stamps or something like that. I don't really know the exact amount, but I just give you an idea about like what was going on at that time. And so everybody was just doing a hustle, no matter what it was, But overall, it was all just a robbery, basically. No matter if somebody was trading stamps for money or whatever they was doing, you was getting robbed, basically. So, that's the kind of stuff was happening. Then people were stealing, they were just stealing everything there. You know what I mean? You could just imagine that it was just like the worst of the worst. And you just, and it was just everybody just trying to do a hustle, trying to make some extra money. But some people was going above and beyond and, breaking every law in the book to get some money, to get the almighty dollar. And, like people used to get robbed on the streets of Detroit City. You could just be walking down the street and you could get robbed in the middle of the day. It wouldn't matter. People needed money. And sometimes the robberies took place where people were on like crack or something like that. It was like on drugs, and they would actually rob people on the streets in broad daylight just to get money to buy crack with. You know what I mean? So it was different scenarios about the robberies and stuff, whether it be a big government official or if it be a street dude or if it be a crackhead. You know what I mean? So it just depends. But the things that went down at that time was out there. You know what I mean? And I'm glad they got YouTube and the internet and stuff like that, because then now you can, the stories that I've told you, you can actually find it on YouTube and stuff like that. Basically just look up abandoned buildings in Detroit City, and you can go from there and get a lot of the history of what went down and stuff like that. And you'll see what I've lived through back in the days in Detroit City. You know what I mean? And I want to say this also, that a lot of people, including myself, that's very lucky to be living today. And what I mean by that is Detroit was a place where any given day you could be killed. You know what I mean? So I really have a lot of respect for people that's older that come from Detroit that actually survived all the shit that I survived. You know what I mean? Because it was just, it was crazy. You know what I mean? And there's tons of people, I would say hundreds, if not thousands of people who lost their lives on the streets of Detroit. And not from dying from, just, you know, natural causes. I'm talking about from dying from different scenarios where people has took your life, or what the case may be. There's just hundreds, if not thousands, of people who lost their lives back then. And in that day and time, it was just a crazy situation, and you had to really live it to understand it. And then you got a whole different outlook on life when you go through all that we've been through, and you're actually a survivor. You know what I mean? Because a lot of guys didn't make it to be 18 years old. You know what I mean? And then some made it to the early 20s. But most guys didn't even get to meet adult life. You know what I mean? And that's how drastic it was. So you really had to know how to move in Detroit City, you know. And to be a survivor of Detroit City from back in the days, hats off to you. You know what I mean? And the reason I tell this story about the robberies and stuff like that is because it's already been said and done. People's already paid their price, whether it be in doing time or they lost their life during the process. And it's on YouTube. You know what I mean? It ain't like it's not. It might be new for you to hear it if you ain't looked it up, but it's really just history of Detroit City is all I'm speaking on. You know what I mean? It ain't like what I'm gonna tell you is gonna land somebody in jail or something like that. It ain't gonna happen like that because this is just back in the day, the history of Detroit. Everybody's paid a price, whether they went to jail or they lost their life, and it's public record. You know what I mean? Everything I'm talking about. It's just I just figure I wanted to do a segment on my channel, and that's what it's about. And something that I'm familiar with and that I've lived through and things like that. So, you know, it was just crazy. And I remember one time my aunt had came from the South to come to visit us in Detroit City. And then she has a Chevrolet, I believe it's a Chevrolet Impala. And she brings her kids with her. And she don't have a husband at this time. But she comes and drives all the way from Tennessee to Detroit City on Trumbull and Selden to visit us in the summer. And while she's there, her car gets stolen right out in front of our house. So she has to report it stolen. And then they find it on the east side. So basically, somebody stole it just to get it over to the east side or just for joyriding, whatever. And that was her experience. And I believe that was her first time in Detroit City. And I remember years later she would talk about it, and but her thing was she kept trying to figure out who stole her car, even though they found her car and she ended up getting her car back, but she just kept trying to figure out who stole it. And I was like, it doesn't matter who stole it, at least you got it back. But that was her theory. She just always wanted to know who took the car. So it was just crazy. But you just really had to watch how you operated in Detroit City back in them days and how you moved and things like that. Because it was ruthless. You know what I mean? They wasn't nobody, trying to, feel sorry for you or anything like that. If you was getting robbed, you was getting robbed, and that was the end of the story. Your best thing is just to hope that they didn't take your life when they robbed you. You know what I mean? That's how drastic it was back in the day. But, I feel for all the people who lost their lives in Detroit City due to unfortunate circumstance, and a lot of people, a lot of young dudes, they lost their life, you know what I mean? And it's just crazy that, that's why it's very important for the young generation to know today. They just really need to do their history on what happened in the past, whether it be Detroit City, Atlanta, LA, wherever it is in the big cities. The young people today just need to do the history of these big cities, you know, and Chicago and stuff like that, and just see what went down in the 80s and 90s, stuff like that. And and once they did that, they might have a different perspective on what they're doing today. But basically, what I'm trying to do is just save these young people's lives. You know what I mean? Because you could live to be an older dude, and then you can end up, having a wife, a family, have some grandkids, enjoy your family, your immediate family, stuff like that, and shit be good. You know what I mean? But it's just the choices that the young dudes made back in the day in Detroit City cost them their life, you know. And if it didn't cost them their life through a demise, it cost them most of their life in prison. And, either way, you lose your life. You know what I mean? And then you ain't going to be the same individual when you come out of prison doing, 10, 15, 20 years. You're going to be a different cat, you know? So, to all the young generation, stuff like that, if you're listening to this, I'm an old school dude from Detroit City. My name's Slick. And I just wish y'all the best, and I wish y'all would, just make some good decisions on a day-to-day basis. And, your mother will appreciate it, your grandmother appreciate it, and, the shit's real, dude. You know what I mean? And it's just the way it is, and it's totally up to you. If you want to live long, you can do it by making good choices and watch how you move and where you go, who you run with, and things of that nature, you know. And I'm the last one to try to preach to somebody, but I really just feel like I should just say this to the younger generation, and hopefully they'll take it in and roll with it, because just do the history of back in the days, and you'll see, you know, there's no way you could live what I lived, or there's no way you could go through the stuff that I went through, but there is a way that you could find out what happened in the past, and then you could see that, you'd rather, avoid that kind of stuff and live a long life and a healthy life, accumulate a wife, accumulate some kids, be around for your mom, be around for your grandma, and shit be good. You know what I mean? So just think about that. It's real important. But main thing is keep your head up, stay positive, do the right thing, and look out for each other. That's the main message. And then things could be good, you know what I mean? And we can all make things good as a whole by just treating each other good and, uh, watching out for each other, you know what I mean? And that's real important in life. So that being said, we're going to cut this off here. We appreciate everybody that's listening and being a part of Detroit's darkest times. So if you like, we'd like you to subscribe, hit the like and the notification bell, and more stories to come. Stay with us, grow with us, be a part of Detroit's darkest times. We out.